Now let's go ahead and start off with just water. Now I'm sure everybody here has heard some sort of a comment about how much of your body is composed of water. You know, maybe you've heard that your body is 60% water. Maybe you've heard that your body is 75% water, 3/4. You might have heard all sorts of different numbers. And frankly, well, I hope it's not difficult for you to understand that it really depends. There's no one number for everybody. Now, the numbers that I can best give you are about 50 to 70% of the human body is going to be composed of water. But really what that's going to depend on is your amount of lean muscle tissue as well as your amount of fat tissue. Of course, fat is oil. Oil and water don't mix, so fat tissue is going to be composed of a very small percentage of water. There is some water because fat tissue on the human body actually has some lean tissue, some cells, and some small amount of protein structure that holds the fat together. You know, if you've ever handled raw meat, for example, the fat that is often on whatever the meat is has some sort of structure to it. It's not like the fat on a piece of meat is like butter or oil. It has a little bit of structure. You have to cut through it and things. That's because of that lean tissue. So there is some amount of water, but very little, especially compared to a tissue like muscle. Now, because of that, the more muscle and the less body fat that you have, the higher percentage of your body mass is going to be composed of water. If someone like a bodybuilder, really, really big muscles, very, very low body fat, they are probably going to be in that 70% body water. Somebody who is overweight, especially somebody who doesn't have very much muscle, and somebody who does have a lot of body fat, is probably going to be a lot lower in that percentage, probably closer to that 50% body water. But perhaps those aren't the people who really are listening to this podcast, right? So the fact that our body is highly composed of water should be appealing to everyone listening to this. You, all who are listening to this, likely have a higher body water percentage. And because of that, it's important for you to understand how to maintain that, how to help your body maintain it. It does have a lot of systems involved and already in place that take care of that for you. We'll discuss that more later. But now what I'd like to do is explain some of the purposes water does, some of the things it does in your body. Now, some of you know you can only go 3 days without water is a common thing thrown around. Now, that exact number, again, is going to depend on the person. In this case, actually, somebody who has a lower percent body water might actually be able to live a little longer without water. Someone who has more fat mass that they are carrying around. This is a random fact that's just popping into my head, but actually polar bears in the Arctic Circle, it's very hard for them to get water. You know, they can't just eat the snow and the ice because that could lead to hypothermia. They can't drink the salt water. Well, actually, one of their main sources of water is just through the metabolism of fat. We've talked about in previous episodes that fat tissue, when it is broken down for energy, is converted into carbon dioxide and water. And the polar bears, as well as our own human bodies, can actually utilize that water for the sake of hydration. Anyways, that was kind of off on a sidetrack, but an interesting fact, I think. We know that water is important. We know that we can't go very long without it. But what does it do exactly? Well, it's a number of things. Now, the first and probably the most important thing is that it is a transporter. In the lymphatic system of the body, in the blood, the cardiovascular system of the body, as well as in the digestive tract. Water is a very important transporter, both of nutrients, food, as well as a transporter of waste. Our cells create waste, our bodies create waste, and that waste needs to be transported out of the body just as much as the nutrients and the good things need to be transported into the cells and into the body. And that way, water is an important transporter of the waste outside. Water is also responsible for regulating our body temperature. Now, this is a twofold system. The first is that water has a very high specific heat, meaning that it takes a relatively high amount of energy to change the temperature of a certain mass of water. So, since our bodies are composed so much of water, just the fact that we're composed of water makes it more challenging for the environment around us to change the heat of our bodies, which is good and desirable. But also, of course, water is involved in sweating, and sweating is used to maintain our body temperature in hot environments. Water is also very important for our metabolism. Now, metabolism is, you understand, of the breaking down of nutrients for our bodies. There's all sorts of things that we break down in our bodies, even aside from just the nutrients that we eat. In our DNA and our protein structure in our bodies, there's a lot of breakdown and putting back together. Water is used in something called a hydrolysis reaction. Now, hydro, of course, means water, and lysis means to cut or to break or to dissect, however you want to interpret that. So a hydrolysis reaction is a reaction that involves the breaking down of water. Now, an example of that would be when two amino acids break apart from each other. If amino acids are strung together, they make a protein chain or a peptide, depending on the length of it. And when those are broken down into individual amino acids, it's a hydrolysis reaction. And so the water molecule, which is H2O, is broken down into one hydrogen and one hydroxyl group, which is OH. Then that water that is broken down can kind of actually seal off the ends of whatever this molecule is that broke down. There actually are kind of countless examples of these hydrolysis reactions. If you've ever taken, or if you ever do take a biology class, I think you'll become very familiar with that. Now, water is also important for the lubrication of our bodies, of our joints especially, as well as for the production of things like enzymes that our body uses in the digestive system, for the production of our saliva, of mucous membranes, things, the water in our eyes that lubricates our eyes. I don't want to go into too much detail, or it does kind of start to get a little gross, but there's lots of enzymes and bodily fluids that are very, very important that, frankly, some of you might not even be super aware of inside of us. And many, if not probably most or all of them, have water as a huge component. Without water, without staying properly hydrated, all of these systems would kind of start to shut down, and that is why water is so important. Now, especially in the context of an athlete, water is very important, but so are electrolytes. In fact, there are instances where water simply is not enough, and we need electrolytes. Now, when I think of electrolytes, probably what most of you guys think of is salt or sodium, and that's exactly right. That is probably the primary one of the most common and most important. However, there are 5 primary electrolytes in the body. The first one is sodium. The second one is potassium. The third is magnesium. The fourth is chloride. And the fifth is calcium. Now, electrolytes get their name from the fact that they are responsible for electrical impulses and flow through our body. Now, you may know or you may not know that our brain communicates to our muscles through electricity. Now, we don't have wires inside of our bodies like you'd see in a computer or some sort of electric motor or anything like that, but we have nerves, which are full of electrolytes, which have positive or negative charges on them, depending on the electrolyte, just like a battery has a positive and a negative charge on it. And because of that, when the action potential of a muscle reaches a certain threshold, that action potential is able to fire and the muscle starts to contract. These electrolytes are very, very important for muscle contractions, which should be desirable for athletes, human performers, to run and to jump and to push and to throw. All requires our skeletal muscles. However, our heart also is incredibly important to everybody, to athletes as well. Sometimes it gets a little overlooked, depending on what your sport is, something like cross country or swimming. I'm sure that you're not overlooking your heart. You understand the importance of your heart and your heart rate. But these electrolytes are also important for the electrical impulses and the muscle contractions of your heart, your 2 ventricles and your 2 atria. The heart's a muscle, and if those electrolyte balances are not what they're supposed to be, then you can get into some serious trouble with heart arrhythmias, leading to cardiac arrest in some terrible cases. But hopefully for most of us, just when we're dehydrated and we don't have the electrolytes that we should have, we just have muscle cramps and fatigue and things like that. Hopefully no heart arrhythmias, but it is definitely possible.